Great, and we're moving right into our very exciting panel, and two really thoughtful leaders in education are with us here today. They almost need no introduction, but I want to make sure everybody knows about these two talented, amazing people. Of course, Randi Weingarten is president of the 1.8 million member American Federation of Teachers and has long championed education at the local level, at the state level, at the national level. She's been on the front lines for decades on so many issues, the digital revolution, access to education for low-income families, and is really a thought leader in how we can help kids achieve. And obviously, we all know that nothing is more important than that teacher in the classroom for kids to succeed. We're also joined by a real innovator. In fact, New York Times called Geoffrey Canada's Harlem Children's Zone, quote, one of the most ambitious social policy experiments of our time. It started as a one-block pilot project in the 90s. 34,000 students are served by Harlem Children's Zone. It's been absolutely transformative in central Harlem. It's been a national model. In fact, it helped spawn President Obama's Promise Neighborhoods initiative to replicate that. I think that the challenging piece is it's not something that we can sort of as governors or president can do top down. It really takes bottom up, and we need more of you. Geoffrey, we need you in all of our cities and states, and we have to find those leaders and give them the tools they need. But we are so grateful to welcome both of you to join us, Randi Weingarten and Geoffrey Canada. And we'll give you both opening remarks there, and I know our governors have a lot of questions.
Can you hear me? So, first off, I just want to say thank you for letting me spend an hour with Geoffrey. Because, you know, during a lot of the time during COVID, we talked on the phone a lot about what do we do, how do we do things, and we did, I think, joint op-ed at one point or another. And I also really am honored to be with all of you today. I want to just, I know we had a bunch of questions, but I just really want to not dumb it down, but really streamline what I have learned in the last 40 years, which is there's a lot of things that we can do to improve. There's a lot of things that we can do to mess things up. But one of the things that is really enduring about America is that Americans want opportunity for all. And we want for our kids and our grandkids to have a better life for them than we had for ourselves. And that is something that has been an enduring piece of the American dream. And education and public education, which is basically still 90% of kids go to public schools in rural, suburban, and urban areas across the country. It is that civic square in so many ways, particularly in rural ways. Now, when I said I want to streamline things, there's a lot of things that I could talk about, but this is the most important piece, which is there are two leverage points that I've learned over these 40-so-odd years. That includes teaching in New York City public schools as an AP Gov teacher in a vocational school, and fighting hard to keep those vocational schools because, yes, it's now called a career tech ed school, but there was a period of time when even in New York City, they wanted to kill all of them. And we fought really hard to keep them, and we lost many of them. Could you imagine if we still had many and they could be converted right now to what we need for workforce? So these are the two things. Number one, something I learned from Jeff, which is you have to create an environment where kids and their teachers and their families feel like that environment is safe and welcoming. There's a whole lot of different ways to do it. There's about 400 community schools in New York City that are basically based on Jeff's model and David Dinkins' Beacon model, and as we have developed them. There's lots of other ways in terms of mental health and all sorts of other things, but feeling like that square, that public square is really there for parents, for students, for educators, and that school is that community. That school, that diverse, complicated, inclusive school is that community. Rural areas have it a lot. That's number one, a welcoming and safe environment. And number two, and I represent more colleges and more college professors than probably anyone else in the country. We are the largest college union. We're the second largest nurse union. We're the second largest pre-K-12 union. We have to make school interesting to young adults. They have to feel like it's relevant to them. They have to feel engaged. Engagement, Frank Luntz would tell us, is the #1 issue that parents want right now. Not great test scores, but engagement. It goes back to that first piece. So what I've learned is that experiential learning and project-based learning is the most important thing we can do. Tinkering to critical thinking is hugely important. And that career tech ed is one of the best ways to do that. So I would actually ask all of us, don't wait to secondary, to post-secondary. We should be changing high school to be about a bigger choice public system so that kids can have dual enrollment in any number of things. Dual enrollment in terms of a certification program, an apprentice program, an internship program. What I've learned is that if we keep a curriculum relevant and engaged to kids, whether it's a welder or whether it's advanced manufacturing or whether it's my AP Gov course, we keep it really interesting. We also then have internships and apprenticeships that are paid because our kids need that, and we have real alignment to the workforce and the industry of today and tomorrow in an area, we can turn things around hugely. And this will be the last thing I said. We've done that in different places. We are really, really good at creating pilots. We are really, really bad at sustaining and scaling what works. So I could go through, we created a pilot in McDowell County, West Virginia, off of Jeff's model. We hugely increased the graduation rate, all sorts of other things. We can't replicate it in rural areas because we don't have a system that helps us do that. We've created a pilot with Micron in New York State, 10 school districts with Governor Hochul. We've created pilots with Mayor Bloomberg in healthcare. We've created a bunch of other pilots. We've gone to Switzerland to see what they do. Part of what we need governors to help us with is how do we take these really good ideas and sustain and scale them in a way that every public school is a place that parents want to send their kids, educators want to work, and most importantly, kids thrive. Thanks.
Thank you. Jeff.
First of all, I fully endorse Randy's view of the challenges that we have answers to, and we're not actually scaling those. I want to give the bad news first and then the good news. We were struggling with education before COVID. COVID broke our system. And I just need the governors to understand that the contract that we had between parents and children in schools were broken during that time. Our kids weren't going to schools. And yes, now you have chronic absenteeism double in the high 20s all over the country. And in some of our places, it's 40%, some even high. Kids are just not showing up to school. This is not, you cannot look and blame a teacher or a principal. We had something happen that was so devastating to children and families in this country that I'm worried that people are simply going along as if everything's fine, and this thing is going to be a disaster for our country unless we address this. So my first call out is we can't keep doing the same thing that we were struggling with before in this new time that our kids are facing. We've got to really make sure that we're looking for models that can partner in different ways with education. So here's the second thing I want to say about that, because this is part of the good news. We've dumped all of this on the schools. We've decided no matter how poor you are, no matter what your disabilities, no matter what your family situation, we're going to simply let schools fix it, and it's an impossible task for any one person. You give me a classroom that half of my kids are 2 years behind, the other half are 3 years behind, I'm sorry, and I'm going to have one teacher figure out how to do all. It just does not work. What we're calling for at the Harlem Children's Zone is a new model, a new paradigm where we partner. Why are we not finding partners who can help us drive this work? So our model is cradle to career, because I agree with the Secretary of Education, pre-K is great, but who hasn't heard of 0 to 3? I mean, why aren't we really looking at what the science says? The science says that young brain needs stimulation when it's first here. If you're not talking, singing, interacting with that brain, those kids are all, by the time they get to pre-K, they're already years behind. The science is clear on that. Why aren't we doing anything about it? Well, we're working with folks around this country who are deciding this is a model. And by the way, I'm talking about all kids. I'm talking about kids in rural America. I'm talking about kids in our urban centers. I'm talking whether you're in the South or the West. Our poor children, and this is the poverty rates, really stark in our country. Our poor children need a different kind of education intervention than what we're doing right now. And we got the evidence that it will work. We've eliminated the achievement gap. My kids come from the poorest sections of Harlem. There's no creaming going on. But guess what? We got those kids on Saturdays. Randy and I wrote an op-ed that we need our schools open in the summertime because you've got to catch these kids up. They're behind, and we can't keep thinking, well, the system is going to do it. I'm telling you right now, it's not going to do it. We partnered with Governor Moore in Maryland he's going to do around his whole state what we're doing in Harlem, figuring out where are our challenges in rural America, where are our challenges in the suburban communities. How do we bring those parents and young people together with a new vision of education? One that says to them, we're going to stick with you and make sure we comprehensively meet your needs. We got kids with medical needs, social service needs. There are kids coming into the schools, they're hungry. We need to make sure all those needs are met because we know they interfere with education. It's complicated. It takes additional resources. Yes, but I'm going to say this. You're in New York City. People say, what does it cost, Jeff? You're doing this literally from the moment a baby's born in my 97 blocks in Harlem till we graduate them from college. Right now, I got about 1,000 kids in college right now. It costs an additional $3,500 a year per kid. That's what it costs. People say, we can't afford it. You're not going to believe this. We got about 11,000 kids we're working with. There are about 11,000 folks in our city jails. Guess what that costs a year? Try $500,000. I know you don't believe me. Just go. Text, look it up. See what a New York City jail costs. We are spending our dollars on these same families. We're not educating them on the front end, and then we're paying on the back end. We have folks, look, my kids are all graduating from college. They're paying taxes. All kinds of businesses have opened in Harlem because there's folks there with the education. They have money. They want to participate in the economy. This is all about preparing the next group of folks to enter the labor market in this country. So I know y'all didn't expect I'd be yelling at you this morning, but I feel like that kid with his thumb in the dike and saying to folks, don't y'all understand this thing is about to flood us and we're about to be overwhelmed with a bunch of young folks who are not prepared to enter the labor market in 5 or 6 years if we don't do something different. And the action is going to be at the governor level, that you're going to have to drive this into the cities and into the neighborhoods and into those individual schools, and we've got answers. The question is, are we going to come up with a plan of how we scale those answers around the country?
Thank you for your inspirational leadership, transformative for so many kids and families. Question for each of you, and then we'll go to our governors. For Randy, you mentioned interesting, making it interesting is one, and I'd like to tie that into making it relevant. I think that kids are interested when they see it as relevant, and how can we kind of address that relevancy of what education means? Young people are inherently smart. People of all ages are inherently smart. They want to know kind of what's in it for them and why it's relevant to their lives. And then to Jeff, I wanted to ask, basically how do we replicate you? But I mean, the challenge we have is this can't, if it comes from, we have in every system excellence. I mean, there's going to be a great principal here. There's a great great classroom teacher. If only we had 100 over. I wish you were in all of our cities. I need a Jeff Canada in East Denver. But it can't be really imposed by us. We can help empower people, but how do we kind of, grow that bottom-up talent that we can support? Those are the questions to each of you.
So we have, let me also see if I can answer both of them too, because you should too.
Your take on both of them would be great,
No,
and you can certainly address relevance.
Because Jeff's model is, it's a community school model and it's a neighborhood promise model. And it's hard to do a neighborhood promise model, but it's actually not so hard to do a community school model. And one of the things that we see is that there's an average $7 to $15 return on investment when you do a model of wrapping services around with lots of different partners around a school. We have about 400, how many, 1,800 around the country, Marla? Because of things that we have seeded, or we have seeded with school districts. The issue becomes there is an upfront cost, which we got to some extent from the ARP funds from the last president, but there's also a management cost, because you have to have somebody in the school that's actually managing this piece of it all the time. And instead of just putting that on the principal's shoulders, you actually have to manage what you're wrapping and also engaging parents and kids in this. But the school itself could actually be the center of communities. And so it is doable. I think the question to the governors that I would ask is, what are the obstacles that stop any of us from sustaining and scaling? One of the obstacles is you got a lot of new superintendents that come in and want to have their own way and their own thing. But what are the other obstacles other than finding this basically $3,000 to $4,000 that you need per student? That's number one. Number two, your question that you asked about relevance and engagement and interest. I agree with Jeff that something broke in COVID, and part of it was relational. And it doesn't actually matter if you look at schools that opened within a month or two, and my union tried to get us to open schools as early as 30 days after COVID started in April, because we understood the devastation that was about to happen. We didn't understand the length, but we understood it. But we broke relationships, and we broke the social contract that school was a place that kids had to go. And so, and we substituted social media for relational work. And there's been a real displacement of relationships. And so part of what a career tech ed program does, whether it's welding, whether it's advanced manufacturing, whether it's culinary, whether it's cyber, whatever it is, you actually are starting to create 5 real important skills that kids need in terms of life. One is problem solving. Second is critical thinking. Third is communications. Fourth is resilience. And fifth is relational work with each other.
Just real quickly on that, and none of those are things that we formally necessarily measure, right?
Exactly. So what happens is we measure the memorization of math and basic literacy skills. You have to have basic math and literacy skills to do any of the things I just talked about. But that work is interesting to kids and relevant, and they see a future. And frankly, in these career tech ed schools, across the country, about 95% of kids graduate from high school, and 72% of kids go to college, so that there's lots and lots of choices that kids have. So when we think about dual enrollment, let's not just think about AP Gov or AP Science. Let's think about dual enrollment with a community college or for these kind of certification programs.
Jeff?
So here is one of the challenges that I think the answer is basic, but again, we have a scale issue. I'm interested in getting our kids back to school. They're not showing up. There's a sense, when I was a kid, you had to go to school. There was a belief that if you missed a day, when kids don't go to schools for years and parents feel like, well, you really don't have to go to school, that things were kind of okay, that we have to change. And schools can't do this by themselves. Now, I know from practical experience, someone has to go knock on that door. Someone has to get that kid and reconnect them back to a support system. So again, I am just pushing that we think outside the box and not just think the answers are all going to be inside that school building. We've got to form different kinds of partnerships. And one of the biggest challenges in doing that work is that folks have thought that this is really the school's issue, and all these other folks who want to come help, they're outsiders. Well, that's not, this has to be jointly tackled by the school and folks in the community. So, Governor Polis, you said, so do you need a Jeff Canada to get this work done? Well, I sure hope not, because I'm kind of old now, so I'm thinking of how to pass this on. But this is what we have partnered. I have a partner here from Blue Meridian Partners. We have partnered with a foundation, and we're going to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in creating these partnerships, figuring out the science, trying to make sure we can go and figure out how we scale these efforts around the country. The first state we tried to do this with is Maryland. I happen to have known Westmore for many, many years, so maybe that's why. But it's not, that's the first. We hope to do this with other states where we come up with a plan that we look at the data, we see where the least mobility is in your state. And you know what, when you find these places, it's not like it's a year or two. It's been 20 or 30 years, there's been no mobilities in these neighborhoods, in these schools, and we want to target a set of supports that go in and change that. So how are we growing the talent to do this? Last year we met with 15 superintendents from around the country, and we took them around the country to see what these partnerships look like. And we were trying to show them that there are places, you go to Louisville and you see what Dr. Polio, who was superintendent there, was doing with a group in Louisville, and it's a model for how this can work in your communities. And then we're bringing leaders together, training them on the techniques. Again, this is not rocket science, but you actually have to know what you're doing. We just had 15 mayors from around the country who spent 2 days with us here learning about what this work looks like on the ground and how you form these partnerships. So there are ways of doing it, but you've got to be prepared to think about education differently. And again, I'm talking about the kids in the deep end of the pool, kids that have struggled for generations to try and figure out how they can experience the American dream. There are answers to this. They're not simple. You do have to raise resources. We're looking for business, philanthropy, and others saying, can't we figure out some partnerships and get this work done? And we're finding that there's some takers. So I think that we've got to admit it's an emergency, admit that if we keep doing what we've been doing, I'm going to just tell you right now, it will not work. So if you just go on and think maybe I'll change this superintendent here or I'll get rid of that principal there, and that is not going to change. You're going to have deep partnerships that are prepared to work for years to really make sure these young people get the kind of comprehensive supports they need. But there are places all over this country that's doing it right now. We're working in 21 cities. They're all focused on figuring this thing out to try and see how we partner with schools to drive outcomes for children.
So I want to get through our governors. We also then will have a discussion. I think hopefully both of you have encountered some of the people around the table. These are thought leaders in education. There are NGA partners. But we'll start with our governors. Governor Lamont.
Hey, beautifully said, inspiring. Jeff, I could tell you for our disconnected kids in Connecticut, you talked about knocking on doors. I found a text, a telephone call was not getting the job done to get them back. They show up with maybe their favorite teacher, maybe a friend, maybe a coach, and we got half those kids back. Let me ask you both more broadly. Charter schools, religious schools, public education, are you competitive? Are you complementary? Randy mentioned scale. Does the Harlem Children's Zone, do you scale by working with Randy and getting more of your innovations in the public school system?
So here's I think one of the most disappointing things that happened. I've been in education this year 50 years. Randy's going to really realize how old I am right now. One of the worst things that happened in those 50 years was there was a decision that when you began to experiment with education and create charter schools, that somehow that was antithetical to public schools, and they should therefore be at odds with one another. And so what one system learned, they did not share with the other system, because it felt like, well, you're a traitor if you start doing what those. That's, to me, this drives me crazy. We need schools that educate children. I don't care what they look like. We've just got to be committed to that. Randy's schools are unionized. That's great. As long as they do great education, I'm all for it. Charter schools often aren't. If they do great education, I'm all for it. Believe me, there's plenty of work for all of us in this country. And I think the conversation has to be about what have we learned that we can share, whether it's parochial school or charter school or great traditional public schools in this country. People act like they're not. There are plenty of them. What can we all learn? Here's my biggest fear right now. And I worry about the dissolution for the Department of Education for this reason. There is such a knock on public schools, teachers, and education that I don't think any smart kids are going to want to come into this field. We are undermining the very thing that's going to keep this country great. We need to be going out and celebrating great educators and saying to folks, this is what you want to do with your life versus don't go into there. You're going to be blamed. You're going to be castigated. People are going to talk bad about you if you do this job. And this is happening all over our country. And all of us who need teachers, we're seeing the impact. They're not coming into the field, and they're getting out of here as quickly as possible. And this, to me, is a huge challenge. And part of it is just because things haven't been working. Everybody wants to blame somebody, right? And what that sounds like is, boy, that whole system is broken and forget it, don't go in. There are answers. We need to lift those answers up and be saying to folks, we actually have some things that work in this country. We need to do more of that.
Amen. Well said, Jeff. Governor McKee.
Well, thanks to both of you. The question I would have, so many of us, including myself, have been working at innovative strategies that could change the outcomes in all our communities. Been at this for several years, and shared some of this with Randy early on. We're doing everything we said we would. We'll have 20 community learning centers opened up in the next year and a half. They were funded. I put it in the budget. Empowering municipalities to actually do what you're talking about, and contacting into families, putting money into grants that would support the compacts that I've been put in place with 38 out of 39 municipal leaders have agreed with me that they will help us do what you're talking about. So we're well on our way, right? Doing the attendance matters dashboard, tracking chronic absenteeism on a daily basis, knowing what the gap is in terms of actually the performance when you're 20%, more than 20%, in that chronic absenteeism area where it's 20 points between your skills. So the question I would have for Jeffrey is, how flexible is what you're talking about? Because one of the problems that I've seen over and over and over and over again is that you go for the next best thing, and you don't stay the course. And we have to stay the course. So I think different states may have different versions of that. I know that the amount of time that I put in since I've been governor dovetails what I did as a mayor, where the schools I opened up, over 5% of the kids that go to public schools in the state of Rhode Island go to the schools that I helped found. So there are things that are happening, and some part of the frustration that I have is that Rhode Island's a small state. Our kid's just as important as any kid in Harlem or anywhere else, right? But yet at the same point in time, my question would be, how flexible are you in taking a snapshot look at what we're doing well, what we can do better, but not change the whole game, because we would go back to square one again. And I just can tell you the work that I've put in with people that are working with me, they're on board. So maybe you can tell me my question would, how can you catch up with states that are actually doing the work in a way that is accomplishing what you're talking about? By the way, 37% of our poverty lives outside of urban districts, yet we tend to talk about urban solutions as if you're actually hitting every single kid or every single family. But anyways, I'll give up my time.
I think we're using different words, but we're basically saying the same thing. And we didn't talk to each other before this presentation. We're saying that we have to meet the needs of kids and their families, the social, emotional, economic needs. And it can be done in different ways. We're saying that the school can't do it all, but the school as a locus is a place where all can actually happen if we had those kind of partnerships. And I know a lot of the partnerships you've been doing in terms of those children learning zones, those children learning communities, which is very similar to what Jeff has done in Harlem Children's Zone, and similar to the community schools that we see in New York City and others. And the real question becomes long-term sustainability of that. But I'm actually saying a second piece here, which is the economic workforce preparing there's the social, emotional piece, the safe learning environment, but the second piece is that academically, we've really, and Governor Polis heard me say this with his question about accountability. We have gotten accountability all wrong since Goals 2000. Not that the standards were wrong, but if we actually want to help kids figure out how to be successful in life, we have to do what every school teacher knows, which is you meet them where they are. And it's not what's said, it's what's heard and what's felt. And that's why this whole notion of career tech ed as the avatar for experiential learning, and thinking about junior high schools and high schools in a profoundly different way is really important. You need to do both. The social, emotional wraparound services so that we are meeting family and kids' needs, and we have to do the academics. And we have to do that in elementary, junior, and particularly senior high school.
I'm going to probably get in a little trouble now, Governor, of course. The first state that we thought we could actually do a statewide initiative was Rhode Island. Gina Raimondo was governor then. I came to Rhode Island. I spent the time. We were talking, and then she went to the White House, and that was the end of that. We are, I think, prepared to meet folks where they are. No one needs to start from scratch. We're not telling everybody, throw the baby out with the bathwater. What we're saying, though, is if you've got a great pre-K program, but you're not doing anything for 0 to 3, let us help you figure it out, right? Why should you have to figure it out? We actually know what's the best stuff in the country. If you've got, a great K to 12, but you haven't really thought about how you connect your children to college or post-secondary, well, let us help you figure it out. We've, figured out who in the country is doing that work the best and want to connect those dots. So this is not, hey, come in and start the Harlem Children's Zone, draw it. This is not what we're saying. We're saying, let's figure out where the gaps are. I think the one thing, if I would want to impress you with one thing, people keep looking for a silver bullet. Third grade reading, is that the answer? Not if the fourth grade is not very good. It's not there. Well, it's great if kids get there, but if they go from a good elementary school to a lousy middle school, it just doesn't work. We've absolutely wasted that investment and all that time and energy. We're saying, let's figure out how, for our most vulnerable children, that literally starting from birth, we give them every opportunity to get their needs met 1 year after the next, after the next. It sounds simple, it is. It's complicated to do on the ground, because on the ground, you've got to have real tackling. We started off, Governor Polis used a little bit of a war analogy. Y'all will forgive me. I'm gonna take that for a moment. We have a strategy for education. Let's say it's the Army, right? In most places, it's over, it'll get the job done. Every now and then, you need the Marines. You need somebody to storm the beach, that will go where other people won't go, will do the tough hand-to-hand combat. In our poorest communities, the Army's not going to be sufficient. You're going to need somebody coming in prepared to do the tough lifting. We're saying, we sure you got your Army out there doing this? Okay, tell us where surgically the Marines need to go in to help support so we can build this cradle to career supports that children need. And by the way, that doesn't happen overnight. One of the biggest challenges in this work, when I've been talking around the country, I've told mostly mayors, I haven't had access to governors, so I'm just yelling at y'all for the first time, but I haven't had y'all, so this is new for y'all. What I've said to mayors is, if you do this, it will take longer than you will be in office. Yeah. And if this is all about you, if this is all about your next election, this is not the thing to do. This is about folks who are committed to the most vulnerable people that in your jurisdiction, and are you prepared to do something that will outlast your tenure as governor? Because it's going to take more than 4 years, more than 8 years to really turn this thing around.
But when you do that for the most vulnerable kids, you're doing that for all kids. And because this has to be opportunity for all kids, I'm particularly worried about boys and the disconnectedness that boys have right now. So you can, you said something earlier, sorry, I didn't mean to jump in, but you said something earlier, Jeff, and this war on woke, and I don't mean to be political here, I'm not intending it this way, but if you are a school teacher in a school right now, and a kid comes up to you and says, I'm gay, or I don't know who I am, and you don't figure out a way to respond because you're worried that somebody's going to blame you for something, think about what is happening in terms of teachers. If a kid asks about what happened in the election on November 6th, and you're worried that if you say something like Trump won or Harris lost, you could get in trouble. That's what's happening in schools right now. That's part of the reason why people are leaving, because they can't actually teach or meet the needs of kids. They're scared to death to do the kinds of things that they know and they need to do. And so part of what we need from you is that I loved when Linda McMahon said, let teachers teach, hallelujah. But we need to actually create these kind of environments so that school can be safe and welcoming for kids, and they want to be there, and they feel like this is their way of getting to the American dream.
So Jeffrey, take another look at Rhode Island. I think we're in a different spot than when you showed up the first time.
All right.
And you're always invited to Colorado as well. Governor Murphy.
Thank you both. These are two icons for all of us, but for me personally, any good educational work we've done in New Jersey, Randy's been by our side every step of the way. And I reminded Jeff about 20 years ago, John Podesta, when he was running the Center for American Progress, asked me to chair an educational blue ribbon commission of some sort. He said, go around the country and see really compelling models. I said, do you have any advice on where I go first? He said, meet Jeff Canada ASAP. So to both of you, thank you. The most discouraging, this is an observation, not a question, most discouraging thing I've heard, which I guess is not news, but it's discouraging to hear with such emphasis from each of you, is this is the worst of all, when you know exactly what works and we're not doing it. I mean, that's kind of shame on all of us. Quick buzzer around question for each of you. What's the biggest price we'll pay, assuming the Federal Department of Education goes away? I think you alluded to lack of ability to attract folks into the profession. And what is a hidden benefit that we might not be aware of or not weighing properly?
Yeah. And you know, I think the Department of Education, like so many other things, has become so politicized, right? When George Bush was president, his act, Leave No Child Behind, forced school systems to disaggregate by race, so you could see. Because lots of places we thought, oh, those kids who are poor or minority are doing good there, but when you look, they were doing just as lousy in those schools as in the inner city schools, but nobody knew it because the whole numbers were hiding the failure inside. So it made us all reevaluate what was happening in schools. The federal government's the only place who can really call on us to examine the tough places. It's easy to hide stuff if there's no universal sort of accountability that's going on. So everybody's freaking out about the NAEP scores. Good, because we all had to look at what's not happening in this country. And the question is, now, does the nation have a response? No, if there's no Department of Education, no. Everybody says, the governors, y'all figure this out for yourselves, see you later. We need some, even whether you like it or hate it, we need somebody saying there's standards in this country, and we're gonna make sure our poorest kids, our kids that folks have forgotten about in rural America, whether it's in Appalachia or inner city Harlem, we're gonna make sure those poorest kids all get equal access to the education services they need. You know, Title I, there's a reason we need Title I, because schools that have more children with needs, special needs, and have difficulties need more funding than others. Are we gonna make sure every state honors that equally? Well, maybe yes, maybe no. The history is not on our side with this. So is there a lot of waste in Department of Education? I'm absolutely sure you're gonna find huge amounts. But this is a case, again, that I don't wanna throw the baby out with the bathwater. Promised neighborhoods, why should someone have to recreate this comprehensive strategy? Community schools, the science on this, if you don't know Raj Chetty from Harvard, the most famous economist we have in this country, he looked at this and said, this thing works. Kids make more money as adults if they've gone to these schools. Here's the problem. If you looked at an individual community school, you couldn't tease it out. You couldn't figure out. But he looked at the big data sets and he says, guess what? This thing is working. It's working for America. Where in this country do we have the ability to find something like that and then scale it all over America without the Department of Education? So, do I think that you need the whole bureaucracy? No, I don't. Do I think there are some real jewels in there that we need to make sure gets preserved? I think absolutely that's the case.
I completely concur with Jeff. I want to remind people that one of my predecessors, Al Shanker, didn't want there to be a Department of Education. He fought to keep it in the then HEW because he didn't want kids to be alone. He wanted kids to be with families and with health care and with that. So I start by saying that because the issue is not the form, it's the function. And I have found, even with, and frankly, Gina Raimondo was our best friend in this, that it was only Gina Raimondo and the Commerce Department and the White House itself that understood that to actually change education the way I'm talking about it, so that career and college would be out in front of a kid's view in high school. That's something that only the federal government and a federal initiative can do if you really want to do it in a big way. If you're really thinking about workforce and you're really thinking about the alignment, why would you have a Commerce Department and not an Education Department? Why would you not actually think that education is this important as a national prerogative? So the number one issue for me is what symbolism does it say to the world when the one department that Donald Trump wants to end is the one about the future? That's number one. Number two, I don't believe, and I may disagree with some of the governors that are here. You want to have competitive grants on top of the formula grants? Fine. Let's find the money to do that. We have done that often. But those formula grants for Title I, for IDEA, they are absolutely essential to kids. And if we don't have an entity that's basically saying we're accountable for the money, so you, school district, New York City, you can't spend it here, you gotta spend it on these kids, we need that.
And I think, that's why, and I think I pinned the secretary down on that, because she did early on say competitive grants, and then she sort of backed off that. Right, above and beyond the formulaic piece, it's hard to imagine, well, ironically for them and for us, if you turn some formulaic into grant, you're creating more work for them and for us. More of it goes to paperwork, less of it goes to the classroom. We're going to go, with your permission, we'll go 7 or 8 minutes more. Is that okay? Because we're having a great discussion, I think, and we have lunch next. But I wanted to go to our table of thought leaders in education. I know you've been listening very patiently. I'm sure you have some questions or comments for our panel. Just raise your hand and we'll call on you. Yes, go ahead, Jessica Thorne. And if you could just briefly
Hi there.
introduce yourself.
Thanks, Governor Polis. Jessica Thorne, Donors Choose. It's so nice to have both of you here today. Thank you. As I think all three of us are involved in organizations that really support teachers and are really close to the work that teachers do. And Randy, I heard you mention accountability and the testing systems is one thing that might be holding teachers back. With the governors here in the room, what are some other barriers we could remove for teachers so that they feel empowered to do the work that they know best how to do?
Number one, respect them. Treat them like they're not dirt. Treat them like they're not a cog in the wheel. Teachers actually go into this job to make a difference in the lives of kids. And yes, you're going to find people who are there for 30 years that shouldn't be there. But the attrition rate is so high, most people who don't think that they can do it leave. We have a higher attrition rate than pretty much any other profession. So finding a way to ensure that people can actually do the job that they want to do is really important. Give them that latitude to do it. The American Historical Association found that even with everything that's going on in the dialectic, that history teachers are basically teaching what they're supposed to do. So give them the resources, a livable wage, and some latitude to actually meet the needs of kids. And many more people would stay because they wouldn't get into teaching right now unless they actually loved kids. Not everybody, but mostly.
And by the way, our call to action for our initiative, Let's Get Ready, is for every governor to uplift something great going on in education. So now it could be a school, it could be a great teacher. So we're trying to get every governor to kind of join in people always talk about what's not going well. There are just as many examples of what is going well and what's remarkable. Yes, go ahead. Introduce yourself briefly.
Good afternoon, Danielle Branson, Cognia. Your statement, "We are really good at piloting, but we struggle with scaling," really resonated with me. As a measurement expert and a former special education teacher, I'm constantly thinking about how do we get the best information about kids in front of the right people at the right time to act in service of students. And so my question to you is, how do we best leverage our data in this moment about student performance to act quickly and nimbly to scale what works?
So Jeff and I may actually differ on this, but I think we have to have a different accountability system so that, hear me clearly, we have to have an accountability system. But we have to have one that is much more aligned to the question that you just asked. We have to have a question that's an accountability system that's more aligned to what kids need to know and be able to do to be successful in life. And then what happens is that that data would then be aligned to that, and we'd be rowing in the same direction. The problem for most schools, and that's where that compliance number, I don't know if it's 47 cents or something else, but if you think about a school, and whether it's a charter school or another kind of public school, if their accountability system tells them to do this, and they know that the right way to do it is to do this, then you're creating such cognitive dissonance, and people can't long-term, with the problems that we have and the challenges we have, do both. And what's happened as a result is you saw it in the NAEP scores, even though, look, in the PISA scores, we're kind of in the middle. But you saw, take Florida, which actually went down in NAEP scores. And it's just, you can't have one accountability system that says to look at these test scores and the other to look at real life. And I think if we changed accountability to be more like what we know right now in terms of the science of learning and in terms of what we want kids to know and be able to do, then we'd be able to scale more, and then we'd be able to align better.
We're going to go sort of rapid fire so we get to more people, and then we'll give you the closing opportunity. So I have Laura. Who else? Rick from Utah, right? And is it Sarah? Sari? Sorry. Sari. Anybody else? Okay, so those three, and then we'll give you guys a closing word. Laura.
Okay, hello, nice to see both of you. I'm thrilled, Randy, that you mentioned problem solving, critical thinking, collaboration, et cetera. Those are the skills that we know matter increasingly for success post-high school. And yet, as you mentioned, those are not being measured. It's not that they're not being taught and that students haven't learned them, but they're not being measured at scale. So I wanted to make sure you knew that we are doing that Skills to the Future has started a pilot that will hopefully go beyond the pilot stage to measure those key skills and not just measure them and report out them in terms of accountability, but to measure those and share that information with learners, with families, and with educators so we can put kids on a path. Could you talk a little bit about what's most important? We've talked a lot about teachers, but I know you all both really care about parents. Can you talk a little bit about what's most important to parents and how to get down to that level?
Rick. Rick?
Rich.
Rich, go ahead.
Thank you, Governor, and thank you for being here. Rich Nye, Senior Advisor to Governor Cox from the state of Utah, former superintendent. And as a former superintendent, I realized quickly that a lot of the challenges that were being experienced in the schools didn't originate in the schools. And in many cases, our schools are the canary within the community. And recognizing how critical those partners are, whether community schools or Promise Partnerships, and actively sought to engage those. Now, while finance or money in terms of that cost and resource allocation shouldn't be a barrier to things, it is a very significant reality that we are called upon to navigate. Just curious, Jeff, particularly from your experience, how have you met and overcame and sustained some of those fiscal realities?
Great. And Sari, how do you pronounce it again? Sari, go ahead.
Hello, Sari Factor with Imagine Learn. That's way easier. I'm curious as your take on the, I'll call it the value proposition of our schools and what learners, you addressed it a little bit, Randy, with engagement and the desire, the fueling, the desire to come to school and learn. So many parents aren't seeing that value proposition, and I think that's one of the challenges we face in absenteeism, frankly. What would you tell the governors and what would you advise the rest of us that support the education community to do to engage parents, to drive that demand side of getting kids to school and the whole school choice movement as part of that? You also referenced charter schools and how that did not get populated back into the public schools at large. Can you talk a little bit about your perspective there on how we increase the demand?
Well, those last three questions are all related, which is great. The first one, of course, measuring problem solving, but also involving parents. The second question, it's beyond just the school, it's parents, but they were also referencing the whole community support structure. And the third one, again, getting parents to see value. So I think a lot of these final questions are about, we know they're there till 3 o'clock. What about all that other time involving parents? What are the kids doing? On your closing remarks, would love you to address, if you can, those three and leave us with any wisdom that you'd like to share. Jeff.
Great. So Randy has said I can go first, thank you, and I'll try and do this quickly. When it comes to parents, I always say we separate our parents into three groups. A third of our parents, they absolutely love us, and they'll do anything we ask. They'll show up early, they'll do whatever. There's a third of our parents who are just working moms and dads who are exhausted. They're exhausted. They're like, you're the professional, do your job, leave me alone. If we really ask them, they will do it, but they're basically saying, I'm hanging on by my fingernail. And a third of our parents have mental health problems, substance abuse problems, other kinds of things where they're not going to be able to engage. At the Harlem Children's Zone, I look at my results and they better not differ depending on what bucket you're in. You need to do different things for that last group of parents who are really struggling than you need to do for that first group of parents who really got it all together. And this is where I think in education we have come up with one size fits all. And we've just decided, here's the line, you get a pass or a fail because I'm not moving the line, I'm gonna keep it. We're saying, no, that line has to move based on where children are, where their families are. Do you have a second or tertiary set of supports for families that fit into that dynamic? Our after school goes till 7, we open up our schools for parents. The first time you come to see us is not because we have a problem with your child. You've been coming in knowing we're trying to take care of you too. We know you've got as many needs as your kid does, and so we're trying to serve that entire family. So when we do have to talk to you about your kid, you don't feel like we're singling you out or we don't understand the circumstances you're going through. So I think this parents issue is important. The financing issue, we had this theory, and the theory was, could we go into cities, and if we had money, would they match the money? And how much would they raise? And guess what we found? If you've got a really powerful proposition, you can go into cities and you can raise that money, and we have. And for folks who care about rural America, there's a woman named Dreamer Gentry. If you don't know Dreamer, she works in Appalachia. She has taken the same model and applied it to rural America, and guess what? Kids in rural America and families need the same thing if they are poor as other folks. They need the support, they need the services. So we also have requested, when President Obama created Promise Neighborhoods, I went in and said to them, this has to have a private match, a 50% private match. And they would say, why? I said, no, because the government often has to say everything is great, right? You're running for election. You're not going to say things are terrible. We need someone who can keep people accountable by saying, I am not going to invest in this thing if you're not delivering for kids. So I believe in these public-private partnerships. And when we've gone into cities or the one state, we said, let us help with the private stuff. You put up some public dollars. Let's really do a public-private partnership where we can have accountability that stays in for everybody. So I know that was longer than I probably should have taken, Randy.
I'm getting so old, I forgot the questions.
Mostly about parent involvement, families beyond the
teasing,
school,
I'm
all that
teasing.
stuff, yeah. so-
I'm not.
The,
I wrote mine down.
see? Look, parents have to be our essential partners. And with all of the buffeting that has happened around public schooling, as I said, I'm in the middle of, I just finished writing a book, so my stats are pretty fresh. 90% of parents still send their kids to public schools. And the public school in a rural area in particular tends to be the biggest economic engine in that rural area.
And I can just add something. I
And-
mean, in a small, there's not going to be a charter school, private school. I
Not
mean,
gonna be a
there's
charter
barely one school. You know, that's what they got.
There's not going to be a
yeah.
private school, there's not going to be, there's not, and what has happened, for those of you who don't know, I still run one of the most successful charter schools in New York City with a 95, 98% graduation rate in the Bronx. And like Jeff said, Shanker really believed that charters should be an incubator for new ideas. I think that so parents, we have to, one of the reasons I love community schools or Jeff's model as well as others is that they are basically a model that engages the family in a real sustainable way. And then you try to do what families need you to do, but also for the families that can't, as Jeff just said, how do you help the kids? Because we are in locus parentis regardless. But the other piece I wanted to just say to you, Laura, is this. It's important to figure out new and real and accurate measurements. What we can't do is keep on layering measurements. We have to actually get rid of some in order to have more. I'll end with these two stories. I was at a school in Cicero, it's a northern Syracuse district with Governor Hochul and with Secretary, with Gino Raimondo. And we were with some of our districts that were in this Micron partnership, 10 districts, including the Watertown district in upstate New York. And one of the kids came up to us. His name was Lucas. A kid came up to me and two teachers came up to me. And Lucas said, and he was, I don't know, 15 years old, I hated school. I see why I'm in school now. I see it. I'm glad I'm here. I've gone from tinkering to seeing my future. Lucas, white kid. Two teachers heard that story. They both had taught for 29, 30 years in Watertown, as poor as a place could be now. And they said that because they're involved in this Micron 10 district work we're doing, this was the best professional year they had ever had, because they are getting to actually meet the needs of kids. They learned a lot from Micron Technologies. They've learned a lot about the technology, they feel reinvigorated. This is a public-private partnership of the best kind. That's what I'm going for. That level of alignment between relevance, opportunity, a sense of self, and a sense of commitment to an American dream and to the future that we're all doing together. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jeff Canada and Randy Weingarten.